I'm the lucky one to present after lunch, so I'm glad it was a light lunch, so not everyone is really sleepy. I will just try to give a broad overview of what might be an empirical case study of things we have already discussed in the first session in the morning about what's civil society and how it operates and in relation to the context. Is the context and the space is actually shrinking or changing or expanding? We have heard different arguments in that regard from a theoretical point of view, and I'm going to present the Syrian case as maybe an empirical case study based on a research we did in Impact. So Impact is a civil society organization registered in Germany. We are based in Berlin, but most of our work is actually being held in Syria. We work towards a vision of having a strong civil society that can contribute to democracy and to inclusive development. At the beginning, we had Syria as our focus. We are a Syrian organization with a mostly Syrian team, and lately, in that last year, and going into our new strategies for the next 3 years, we're trying to expand more and look into civil society, even outside the Syrian context. So one of our main projects has been mapping of Syrian civil society actors. So our main project was the mapping of civil society organization. The project started in 2015 with the aim to produce a source of information about civil society actors in Syria, especially with increased interest from international stakeholders in what's going on in Syria, who's acting, where they are, and what are their domains of work. So we started the first phase in 2015, then we followed it by the second phase of mapping in 2016, which was the biggest one, targeted almost 748 organizations with a simplified capacity assessment of these organizations. We looked into organized civil society, not for ignoring other parts of civil society, but that was actually our focus in this mapping. And our idea, our aim was to have this constant mapping, to provide actual information all the time and update it and keep this database available. Actually, this was for a lot of technical issues and funding restrictions not totally possible, so we had to do what we call snapshots of civil society maps in Syria. And the last snapshot was done in 2018, and the report was published in July this year, 2019. And I'm going to go through a really overview of it, but the full report is also available with the list of organizations, and all the charts and map is also available on the website for anyone who wants to dig deeper in the Syrian civil society. So what we noticed in 2018 that from the previous mapping in 2016, during these 2 years, there have been radical changes on the situation in Syria. These radical changes in Syria had a very direct impact on the shape and the spread of Syrian civil society organizations inside the country. So what we did that we decided to do just a very initial mapping. We designed a tool specifically for that. It was like a form of a questionnaire of around 90 questions looking into the organization's basic structures, what department do they have, what type of work do they do, where they are present, are they registered or not, what are their needs and priorities, how much staff do they have, and in which domains do they have expertise. And we focused on different geographical areas. Inside Syria, we targeted the 4 main controlled areas according to the current geopolitical lines inside Syria. So I should have included a map here. I'm really sorry I did not put it. But so in 2017 until now, Syria can be really divided into 4 parts, into 4 main controlled areas. The biggest part is currently under the regime control, or under the control of the government of Syria. Another area is under control of what's called the democratic self-administration, or currently the new name is autonomous administration in northeast Syria, which is a small area located in the northeast of the Euphrates River. Also, there is a small area in northern Syria with the borders with Turkey under the de facto Turkish authority, which is known as the Euphrates Shield area. I know we have some funny names for the regions. And also we have the area in northwest, which is still controlled by the opposition. And in later development, it's mostly controlled by Atelier, which is a radical Islamist affiliation of military groups. In addition, we also targeted Syrian organizations that are based outside Syria in neighboring countries, mainly in Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan. So in total, we were able to reach 514 organizations. That was mapped between August and November 2018. We acknowledge that the number is higher if we are talking about the count of organizations that are actually active, but we were not able to reach most of them because some of the limitations. During the security developments, our teams were not able to move around during the time of the mapping because of security threats on the ground. Also, the changes of access, changes of contacts limited our access to certain areas where we totally lost access to this area. Also, there was security concerns by some of the CSOs, and they refused to cooperate with us. We were able to identify them, but they refused to answer our survey and for their data to be entered in our databases. Also, some of them did not have the lack of cooperation, which we had to exclude some of the data we collected. Some of them refused cooperation totally. Some of them in this the HTS controlled area northwest, due to because we are not affiliated with their governmental administrative bodies. So this limited us. We think that the number is totally higher. In the database, we were able to include another almost 100 organizations more from secondary sources, but they were not included in the analysis provided in this report because we did not have the full data on them. So when we looked at the data and tried to compare it with what we had from 2016, we noticed a big shift in the map if we look at the distribution and the main field of work. And that was mainly because these changes in context that I mentioned. I will go to the major changes in context inside Syria very broadly to give an overview of what really changed starting from 2017. First of all, we started to see high discrepancies between these different areas, that the shape of civil society, the characteristic of CSOs is really different. And in these four areas, it's sometimes even in the same control area, we can see differences, but they can be neglected, and we can look at more the four main areas. In 2017, the regime forces, the government of Syria, with the support of its allies, mainly Russia and China and Iran, were starting to regain control over vast areas of Syria. And there has been some areas that were called the de-escalation zones, which were there was de-escalation agreements that the areas were settled with less violence going on. But then all these agreements collapsed one after another between 2017 and August 2018. So a lot of these areas that were big hubs for civil society operating in opposition-controlled area just went under regime control, and that really changed the space available for them to work. Also, as I mentioned, in the northwest, we had the expanding control of the HTS, the radical Islamist umbrella group, and they also had an administrative body that's called the Salvation Government, which currently governs the area. And this control came over what was before known as local councils, local administrative units, and also military factions that were used to be known as Free Syrian Army. In the northeast, we had expansions of control for the Syrian Democratic Forces. It's also an alliance of military forces that were supported directly by the international coalition, the US-led international coalition to fight ISIS. And they took control over the areas where ISIS was expelled from it. So we noticed a lot of changes in civil society presence, mainly in Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor, where there were totally no presence of civil society, organized civil society actors during ISIS time, but then with the SDF and then later what's known now as democratic self-administration, we saw a re-emergence of civil society actors. Also, the area in northern Syria that's known as the Euphrates Shield is now under the de facto Turkish authority, with local councils that operate like locally in the area and govern the area, and that also had its effect on the local civil society actions in the region. All these changes also had different types of changes. So we saw a lot of demographic changes. So areas increasing in population, other areas that are decreasing in population, ethnic concentrations and proportions in each area were totally changing. And that's also due to mass displacements and forced displacement waves, especially those happening in 2018, because they were the biggest so far. I just want to give a very brief note for non-expert audience about the Syrian civil society. Before 2011, before the revolution against the Syrian regime started, there was almost no presence for civil society in the traditional sense. All that was there is mostly charities or faith-based charities and governmental organized, non-governmental organizations, or known as gongos. And the civil society map in Syria, or the civil society scene, has been starting to emerge with the increasing needs after the revolution. When a lot of the areas came out of the state of control, there was a big deprivation in essential services, in providing all kinds of daily services and responding to humanitarian needs, and that gave the rise for civil society actors to fill that vacuum, to operate and take sometimes state functions. So how did that context translate empirically into the statistics of Syrian civil society organizations? We noticed a decrease in CSOs operating in the former de-escalation zone, or the former opposition controlled area, which was regained by the regime control, including eastern Ghouta, northern Homs countryside, Damascus southern suburbs, and also the areas in southern Syria, mainly Daraa and Quneitra provinces. Total decrease, like in 2016 in Daraa alone there was around 60 organizations operating. In 2018 there was only 10, half of them are charities. In opposition controlled area, for example in Idlib in the northwest, we notice an increase in the number of CSOs, and that's because of the huge displacement waves to this area. A lot of people from the previous de-escalation zones were moving here, so there was increase in need, and thus more civil society organizations were emerging to try to respond to the increased needs. Also, post-ISIS area, we noticed re-emergence of civil society organizations. By the end of 2017, so actually a couple of months after ISIS was expelled from that, we were able to map 30 organizations in Raqqa. So from 0 to 30 in less than 1 year. In the area northern of Syria, which is currently under Turkish control, there has been also a decrease, and that's because mostly of legal restrictions on them and their ability to work. Now all organizations working in this area need to have registration or legal permits directly from Turkey, and that's causing them more obstacles and challenges for them to operate in these areas. But on a very different level, like a non-local level, we also notice that there's an increased access by Syrian civil society organizations to the international arena. That can be with the peace processes going, especially the one in Geneva, and we have the civil society support room, which was formed by the special envoy to Syria, Stephen de Mistura, as a counseling body supporting the Geneva peace processes. So we have seen more representatives of Syrian CSOs active in the international arena, attending international conferences, going into peace-building talks, but mostly as a counseling, but not an active role into negotiations itself. So this gives us, by looking at the wider map, we can see some characteristics that are still important to Syrian civil society. the presence of registration, and that's something that was brought up in one of the morning sessions, and the legal frameworks, how that presents restrictions to the organizations, and they are most of the time forced to have registrations in order to be able to access funds, for example, or to be able to have field teams or to go to operate. But the registration rates are not the same in all of these controlled areas. We noticed that from the CSOs mapped, almost 73% of them have legal registration somewhere, mostly in one of the neighboring countries or even with local authorities. But the registration rates are different. So if we see, like, for example, in regime-controlled area, almost half of the organizations work without registration due to a lot of restrictions that are imposed on registrations in these areas. And they work mostly with low-profile, undercover activities, really grassroots, or depend on working under the name or umbrella of unregistered organizations in order to keep the safety of their teams. The vast majority of the Syrian CSOs remain very small in size in terms of human resources. 77% of them has less than 50 staff members in them, and only 8% have more than 200, and that includes the big NGOs now registered in Turkey or Lebanon or Jordan. And also for employment type, it's evident that most of the employees are part-timers, contractors, or volunteers, or project-based staff. Very few staff in CSOs have permanent contracts or work as full-time jobs. But we also noticed that, especially comparing with the previous mappings from 2015-2016, that there's, in addition to registration, there is this tendency to professionalization, to having more internal structures and organizational capacity, and they pay greater attention to administrative departments. That's highly linked to donors' requirements, because a lot of donors require that a CSO has a finance department or have financial procedures or previous financial audits or similar stuff. So most of them have finance department, almost more than 80% of them. And also a bigger percentage, like 75%, have applied financial procedures, and you can see how much the finance and ability to access donors and conform to donors' requirements are high priority for the Syrian CSOs. But at the same time, half of them don't have a salary scale in place for their own staff. And there's also, in the survey, we had one question about the budget of the annual budget of the CSO in wide ranges. We just needed to look into the size of the Syrian civil society organizations financially, how much money is getting funneled to it. And we noticed that there's a big tendency to treat financial data with confidentiality and secrecy. A lot of them said, I don't want, almost 20%, they refuse to answer the questions, labeling the information as secret, confidential, or sensitive. In terms of funding, donations still represents a big percentage of funding. 36% of funding of CSOs comes from donations, either from like organizations or individual fundings, followed by international NGOs with almost 30%. Also, like I mentioned, the rule and the function of Syrian civil society are mostly responding to humanitarian disaster-triggered needs, and that makes a lot of the, we see that a lot of the organizations don't have a target group, a specific target groups. Almost half of the samples we mapped have no target group. And also more than half of them work in relief and social services, and mostly relief work, direct relief work. Also, in terms of need, we still see that financial support remains the highest priority for the organizations. But on the other side, we see that legal support, technical support like languages or foreign-speaking staff, or also human resources still remain a lesser priority for the organizations. So this is a very broad overview. I did not go into all the details, I know, for the time restraints, but we came out with some recommendations for Syrian civil society organizations and also for international stakeholders. So for Syrian CSOs, we recommend to focus more on internal development, on their capacity of their teams to have expertise and long-term staffing. Also increased level of fundraising effort and self-sufficiency policies, less dependency on donors' short-term contracts, but more focused onto fundraising options into core funds, for example, or salary-based operational funds. Also, increased media and outreach efforts. A lot of the CSOs are known only in their small localities and have little efforts being put into spreading their messages and working to a wider audience. Also, I did not go into that, but women participation and involvement remain very low in Syrian CSOs, and we recommend that enhance women involvement. And also try advocacy, building alliances to allow for more access and more effective interventions. As for international stakeholders, we see that direct funds according to needs and avoid the one-for-all strategy. The one-for-all strategy funding and types of projects does not work in a very dynamic changing context. Also support the internal development of CSOs and give them the chance to grow and mature organically. Also support political efforts of Syrian civil society and not only focus on service provision of essential services. Also recommend international stakeholders, including donors and international NGOs and policymakers, to support networking and communications between the CSOs themselves and also with the international actors. Provide more supports to the areas that are deemed high risk and most of the donors avoid it, like government-controlled area or the democratic self-administration area. Also try to take measures against the NGOization of civil society, and also we focus here on organized civil society. We still think that other types of civil society should be supported and not turned into a competitive sector. Provide long-term strategic support and conduct further research and look more into the specified local context of each region before directing any funds or support programs or any interventions. Thank you for your questions. I hope I did not take much more time than planned.